So today's presentation is on new mobility, but it's not just autonomous. I got my start in transit-oriented development 20 years ago as a civic association president fighting a Home Depot on top of my local subway system. So our whole neighborhood got together and taught ourselves urban planning that several of us parlayed into professional jobs. So dreams do come true. So we're going to give a backgrounder. We're going to look at TOD, but also at something called mobility hubs, which is a term that's rising up. Any term that's rising up usually means that there will be grant dollars flowing from that hot new term. So I'm going to try and make sure everybody's up to date on those. And then opportunities in the region. A little bit about the work that I've done. That says more than anything else. I do have my own consulting firm. I work with Alta. I work with nonprofits. Some of the stuff we're working on are how do you insert language into resolutions at the local smallest level, because that's how it all gets started. I worked on a parking reduction strategy for a mixed-use developer from Toronto. We're inserting new mobility into pedestrian plans. And we're writing up a scope for a business improvement district outside of Atlanta that realized they need to get their 200 stakeholders together because they are now planning $500 million worth of infrastructure that they do not want to be out of date before it even gets out of the gate. So that's just a snapshot of how people are starting to think about this. First of all, what is new mobility? And I'm from the South and I talk fast. I do apologize, but I want to make sure that we get a lot of stuff in, and we'll have a chance later today for the Q&A. So if you want to jot down in your program notes and questions, that would be more than welcome. So, you know, in the good old days, we had cars, we had bikes, we had buses and trains, and really little variation in between. Technology is changing all that. Now, this slide is from someone in Toronto, and it's busy, but that's the point. This is where our jobs are right now. There's no such thing as bike share anymore. There are different flavors of bike share. There's docked, there's dockless, there are scooters, there are electric variations, there are amenity fleets, there are public, there's nonprofit, and each of those comes with its own planning nuance. So for anyone in here who does planning and design of infrastructure, site plans, districts, these are the types of things that you will need to pay attention to. And everyone will get a copy of this presentation and links so that you can go to the original source so it won't be so fuzzy, but you can also get the backstory. I also want to come out of the gates talking about how we plan. Some things will not change. And up at the top you see, what do we have? What do we want? How do we get there? That's planning. That won't change. The top half of the circles, that's how we do things now. That also has to continue so that we come up with fair, transparent, inclusive processes to make sure that we meet everyone's goals the best of our ability through proactive planning. The bottom half of the circles are these things coming out of left field, whether it's autonomous vehicles, shared use mobility, mobility as a service, even things like climate change. We are dealing with multiple lines of disruption. So how do we, as planners, our job has always been to squeeze uncertainty out of everything. But now we have to almost turn around completely and start thinking about how do we embrace and incorporate uncertainty. So that some of these planning processes now are, you have to start thinking and tracking trends. You need to start looking at, okay, well, what's possible? What's plausible, and what do we want around here? So that's how planning is changing. We also look at what's in our control. We have new tools to measure and apply metrics for performance-based planning, so that if you don't know where it's going, you can at least put some performance expectations. We want 40% of trips to be X, Y, and Z. So once you start applying technology, you can alter your policies along the way to actually meet those needs. Those goals can be equitable service, they can be climate, they can be congestion, they can be economic development. It's a bit of a new ball game, but it's one that we can all customize for our own region. So here's the idea bubbles. And so what I thought I'd do is just walk through a couple of topics and what the emerging trends are. First and foremost, to me, the most exciting innovation right now isn't autonomous cars, it's bicycles. How many people have bike share in their community? Very good. So in DC, or in Arlington, Virginia, where I live, just 2 days ago, we finally got the pedal assist or the electric bike share. A lot of people, including me, think that these will be game changers because of distance, because of ease, because of applicability. But here's something I want to note. The largest share of trips in this country, anywhere you go, are between 6 and 10 miles. 17% of all trips are between 6 and 10 miles. Electric bikes cover that distance easily with a lower impact, a lower imprint on the environment and on congestion. So that's one of the reasons why these pedal assist bikes are seen as killer tech. In the middle, there's more options to car ownership. So yes, there's Zipcar, but there's also these new business models emerging that I think have higher applicability in the suburbs and places without heavy transit. They're called amenity fleets. So there's companies called Envoy out of LA and Gotcha Technologies that actually will go onto a campus or in a mixed-use development or even for an apartment owner, and they will supply a fleet of vehicles that's like your own Zipcar for your own tenants. So think about what that may mean to getting rid of the second car. Most zoning codes now require 2 parking spaces per unit. Imagine if now everyone has one owned car, but an available fleet. You can cut parking almost in half. So think about that when we're talking about what technology means for suburban areas. Autonomous cars are here, but we don't know what the ownership model will be. And then a big sleeper issue is deliveries. How many people got something from Amazon or e-commerce over the last month delivered to your door? All right. How many people have cussed out a FedEx truck blocking? You don't have to raise your hand on that one. It is becoming clear that deliveries are part of the mobility system that we have to pay careful attention to, if only because there's no longer a person with a shopping cart with 30 different items. There's somebody sitting at home ordering something at 6:30 a.m., maybe at 10:30 because somebody's birthday is tomorrow, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, constant deliveries. Second, in transit. So one of the things that we'll talk about in the Q&A is that technology is already improving the way we deliver transit, and that was included in the remarks this morning. So real-time information, routing on your smartphone, on-demand service. In the middle, and to me this is one of the most eye-opening aspects of where we're headed with this, because of 3D printing, we can now make bespoke sort of custom shells. So Toyota has this concept where they have shells that can be inter-configured throughout the day. So it might be an autonomous mobile coffee shop, almost like the ice cream man, circulating in neighborhoods, and a shoe store in the middle of the day, and a cocktail bar at night, maybe even sleeper pods, which are, by the way, already here. There's a business that operates between Los Angeles and San Francisco called Cabin. It is basically like a train sleeper car in a bus. $90. It replaces airplane trips. It replaces car trips, train trips. And think about what starts to happen when land uses migrate to vehicles and what that may mean for things like commercial property taxable real estate, what it might mean for congestion, what it means for how we collect different sorts of fees. And I think this is something the planning community has to really look for and get ahead of. And then finally, and most exciting, we are already seeing autonomous shuttles and autonomous buses come into pilot programs, and these are testing programs. Switzerland just launched the first public autonomous vehicle on serving public routes. One thing to keep in mind as a region that looks for federal grants for transit, FTA is going to begin to sponsor 5 or so pilots for autonomous bus rapid transit and autonomous shuttles. And to me, the regions that start to lay that table, set that table for these grants are the ones that are going to be winners. And we can talk about that later today too. What does it look like to get ready to get some of these grants? And what does it look like? Do you even want one? Do you want to follow someone else? Do you think your neighbor wants one so you can see what's going on? But these are going to be economic development elements in the future if you can crack the new mobility, remove congestion, and figure out the TOD that works with these autonomous new gadgets. With deliveries, we talked a little bit about this. There's air and ground drones. So delivery bots, they're like coolers on wheels. They're being tested in San Francisco and DC. We are not testing air drones in DC because we have no fly rules, but other places are going to have swarms overhead. So what does that mean from a development perspective? We need to think about, we humans are programmed to swat at things that are buzzing over our head. So what does it mean for experience? We've got bicycles as part of the delivery fleet. So talking about autonomous, Amazon actually sees autonomous vehicles, autonomous drones, and people on bicycles. And you know why they're so excited about bicycles? They can't get hacked. You can't have a hacker take 2 drones and crash into each other. But they see it as part of the redundancy. And they're also lower impact, and people want to have a human face, so that's part of the portfolio. But it also means that cities will need to begin to design for cargo bikes. Again, those planning nuances that are coming into play. Kroger is going to be delivering groceries. They announced that. This bubble right here, this third one over, I added that yesterday. That's how fast things are moving. And then Virgin Atlantic over in London wants to build a hyperloop underneath the city, but for packages. So think about going to the bank when you're the pneumatic tube where you force, imagine that network underground. And that gets all of that package delivery congestion off of the streets. Because that's a big problem in London, and also it doesn't interfere with the historic nature of the neighborhoods they want. So again, we're talking about historic neighborhoods here in the region, and maybe not in the next 10 years, but imagine having these sorts of systems that will allow for that quality of place, but get that conflict off the streets. For rights of way, I was talking to someone this morning, and it's like, curb management, that's a hot new thing. And again, that theme of everyone jostling for curb access. Also, Uber and Lyft have been found in some cities to actually make congestion worse. So now a lot of cities are eyeballing how do we bring transportation demand management to our curbsides. There's increased competition for space. Let's think about placemaking and TOD. So much of the placemaking value is making the public realm inviting, having a lot of things in the public realm. But what happens when you've got all these people competing for their own little space on the sidewalk? Cafes, signage, utilities, smart city utilities, delivery bots, stormwater management, the list goes on. So we're going to have to start looking at demand management for sidewalks. And then finally, with networked districts, thinking about the future of energy and water and everything that flows. What does it look like to have TOD, where so much of what's going on is the next generation of very climate-friendly heating, air conditioning, water control, water collection, that sort of thing. So a lot of what we have to plan for is more underground sorts of things. And then parking. Parking is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, no matter what kind of development you're talking about. And so a lot of the advising I've been doing is looking at how to use technology and good design to reduce that footprint of parking, or at least the impact. Summit, New Jersey had a commuter rail line that was running out of parking space. They were going to spend $10 million on a garage. They decided instead to partner with Lyft and Uber to have on-demand subsidized rides, almost the same price as parking, to alleviate the need for that garage. Part of that is that bond rating agencies are now beginning to question and maybe even downgrade parking structure bonds, just because they don't think with autonomous and shared use, the bondholder will be able to repay over the 30-year life of the bond. That's already happening. Los Angeles and Chandler, Arizona are already putting in new designs into their zoning codes to think about shared use and autonomous. And then Pittsburgh has put all of their different parking assets into one place, because parking is starting to occur in districts, not by building. So you want people who are coming to be able to visibly see where a parking space is that meets their need. Is it public? Is it private? Is it priced? Is it accessible? Is it near where I want to go? Just all these different things, but again, collected into one app. And then building and site design, there's a lot going on with smart cities and just building material, what happens on the inside, what e-commerce is doing, what living preferences are doing, and then 3D printing. What happens when we can start to build units or even buildings right on site using a big 3D printer? That's already happening. And then putting it all together, the big lesson out of today is whether there's a driver or not, land use, infrastructure, and transportation are still interlinked. It still matters. We're not sure whether we're going to get sprawl or compact, but that is our job in this room, to set those policies as to what we want and what the impacts and costs are. This gentleman down here, his name is Jarrett Walker. How many people have heard of Jarrett Walker? Oh, awesome. He's going to be so happy. Jarrett is from Portland, and he redesigns bus routes. For a long time, those were untouchable because it just seemed like taking a bus route away from a couple of customers just was not good. It didn't make good sense. I think that now that we're seeing the need for more transit, he comes in and tries to figure out the routes to meet the needs, but also because we can use shared use and autonomous really to help feed some of those people to the high capacity bus routes that are going to be so important because we have limited rights of way. High capacity transit is going to be as important, if not more important, than we have today, but these new technologies mean that places like never before will have access to high capacity transit. You don't have to be Philadelphia to have really high frequency networks. Amazoning, we talked about that. And then the bottom line is actually the bottom line. Our revenue streams are going to start changing. So how do we start replacing the gas tax, which really doesn't work anymore for transportation and will not work with electric vehicles at all? Revenues and fees that you collect from car ownership, if car ownership actually does go down. Lots of questions there. And at the end of the day, when we talk about new mobility, it's often couched in heaven or hell scenarios. It could either be really, really good or really, really bad. It just depends on not only your policies, but policy combinations that we're going to have to start putting together. Parking is going to have to be keyed towards whether or not autonomous cars are owned or shared. It's going to be keyed to how we price road use and things like that. So exciting times if you're a planner. So this is just sort of the picture of a lot of what we see when the tech companies come to town is really cute when there's one or two. They don't really forge the territory of what happens if there's dozens of companies with thousands of these little devices all around us. And so, again, how do we manage this? So the good news is we can successfully change. So, and here's how we like to not eat the elephant all at once, but how do we eat the elephant in small bites? I guess that's an Indian proverb. So what we like to say is that let's look at those heaven and hell scenarios. Like, how do we look at the things that are beneficial and work those to our advantage? How do we forecast the risks and wring those out at the beginning of the planning process? How do we pick best practices that serve multiple functions, just in case our forecasting doesn't quite pan out? What if autonomous cars just aren't workable at all? Well, if you do good placemaking, you also get the economic development, the climate and energy, the water, the equity. That, to me, is a good practice, is one that will work under any scenario. And then finally, we need to be adaptable. And this is an example of a plaza that meets all of the traditional things we think of plazas. But once you apply smart city technology, you can manage it better for water, for counting, for irrigation, and for maybe even energy collection and storage. So I'm going to take a break. Does anybody have any questions right now? I know I'm going fast. Yes, sir.
So in the last generation of suburban sprawl,
right,
the economics were very, very favorable to building sprawl,
right,
and installing it, not to maintain it over time.
Exactly.
What's going to change here if there are economic incentives to do things which have long-range negative consequences?
Well, and thank you for that question. I'll repeat it. So the incentives are to build sprawl, but not to maintain it, to kick that off to other folks who may be. And part of that may be with the changing business models. The people who have to take care of those long-term investments, whether it's a city or a public-private partnership, will actually have a say earlier in that piece. The same thing goes with the bond rating agencies now beginning to understand that with technology, they're shining a sharper flashlight on not just what happens up front, but the long term. And they're downgrading things that cannot be maintained. I think the second thing is that, and Emeco and Smart Growth America have done fabulous work on actually what I call forensic looks at how we've mismanaged our infrastructure, and then also how do we do a better job in the future. So a lot of it is just pure management, but I think there may be even a technology aspect to this as well. There's a lot of entrepreneurs out there who are trying to figure out how do we replace old pavement that really just is not environmentally friendly with something that's more friendly. Self-healing asphalt, for example. So I think that there's actually sort of an adventurous bunch out there that's trying to figure out how to maintain infrastructure better with technology. It's not the end-all fix. It still includes good planning, priorities. But again, that maintenance part is starting to come into the funding formula up front. So thank you for that question. All right, so you're here today to learn about transit-oriented development and mobility hubs. And a lot of times people ask me, what's the difference between transit-oriented development and a mobility hub? First and foremost, TOD is placemaking around stations, usually for heavier transit, because that's where the investment has a better track record and a better financial return on investment. With hubs, what we're going to do, like that first graphic I showed that was really busy of all the modes, we're starting to aggregate those modes to form placemaking. And that's really exciting because you don't have to be on a heavy transit line anymore. And that's the second time I've said this in the presentation, so that means I must think it's important. And I hope you do too, because a place like Chester County, this means that you're going to start to get some of those benefits that were in the past really localized in areas of heavy transit. They can also work together. So if you are here and you live around one of those stations, a mobility hub begins to look at how you squeeze all these new uses into that station design. It's going to get difficult because you want to actually build seamless transfers into all of your stops and stations. And by seamless, that means you're not tripping over somebody or tripping over a dockless scooter. It means you're going to have to actually design in how people can get from one mode to another easily, seamlessly, and without having to stop to think things through. You just get off the bus and you know exactly how to go to the next shuttle, to the bike share, to the train. So mobility hubs in the future. Again, we talked about districts and the importance of districts. So water, energy, air. I like to think of districts as the shared use economy for places. So how do we do a better job in TOD of linking all of these new types of smart city and new mobility options in a way that we haven't before? Here's busy illustration number 2, and this is from San Diego, and it's just another illustration of how do we put together all of these different pieces in a way that makes sense for the traveler. How does it make sense for the city? How does it make sense for the operator? How does it make sense for the local businessman? And again, this is going to be our challenge to make sure that we draw things together. So what does it look like in a better looking image? And this is actually a mixed use development in San Mateo, California, where they have 2 types of mobility hubs. The first one here with the red dot, they have placed their mobility hub in the center to serve their buildings. That has pros and cons. So it has advantages because all of a sudden you're serving all these people here instead of going out to the street. But if you're the transit provider, it means you have to come off of the corridor to come into the mobility hub. So that's just an illustration of some of the challenges we may have. On the other side, with smart technology, the bus can route inside and have all of the green lights, and actually that variation from the path may take only a couple of seconds. It could be much smoother than we see today. The other mobility hub here, if you go to CVS now, if you go to 7-Eleven, inside the door they have grab and go, right? So you can get a sandwich, you can get a salad, that sort of thing. It's a new way of just getting something quickly. Now imagine that for bicycles and cars and mobility, where you come down into the lobby of the building and there are scooters, there are bikes, there are cars. You come down, you grab it, you go. So it's not just a planning facet, it's an architecture facet as well. And a lot of people think that autonomous cars are going to make lobbies the new hot piece of your architecture, more than they are now. And it's because people are going to be entering on the lobby rather than in the basement where they park their car and get out and come up. So architecture and planning for this mobility that is on demand and on the go. I'm going to save the streets piece for the second keynote, but I did want to also illustrate how technology is going to affect complete streets, which is super hot right now, just so that we can start to balance the different modes on a limited right-of-way. Smart pavement, smart city technology, mode priorities are still a big thing, and then coordinated infrastructure, so that the bus stop is coordinated with the smart city technology, is coordinated with multiple travelers. Curbs and sidewalks. First and foremost, we talked about that growing demand, so sidewalk demand management has got to become a thing. Pickup and drop-off zones for Uber, for Lyft, for e-commerce are a thing. And then how do we plan digital infrastructure? So if you're a private sector developer here, or if you're a public works engineer, heads up, there's going to be a lot more stuff in the public right-of-way, and there's also companies that are trying to figure out how to do that better, more efficiently. So for example, instead of having multiple lines underneath the sidewalk, there's a company that's building it all into handicap accessible ramps so that you pop it up, and if something's broken, you fix it right there and it pops right back down. Again, this is what a lot of these technology companies are starting to think of, and we just better gut check it so it makes sense for taxpayers and ratepayers, and so that maintenance piece is thought of at the very beginning. Parking in the future, this is a little bit futuristic. It's from Arrow Street. This was for a competition where you start to look at the different floors of a building a little bit differently. The takeaway from this image is that rooftops are going to be a very important part of our mobility system, especially for drones. Less sexy is a project I worked on where actually we were held to today's oversupply of parking for a community center. So what we did is we split the site plan into phases. We redid some parts. We got a little bit of a reduction because we put the pickup and drop off here in the very Lyft pink pickup and drop off zone, bike amenities, and a new bus stop. This right here is basically a land bank so that as parking needs go down, as we think they will, that will hold the phase 2 of the development. So again, it's adaptable, it's in phases, it considers technology and the users. Here's what I talked about, and I did know that there would be several private sector developers here, so I wanted to make sure that I took my .gov hat off just for a second and started looking at the buildings and building designs and what your role is going to be in new mobility. It's no longer just parking. It's no longer just maybe a zip car outside on the street a block away. There are all sorts of different things that are amenities now for baby boomers, for millennials, even for people with kids. So that you start having vehicle charging, the amenity fleets, the bike rooms, the showers. Again, it's all travelers all the time. Oh, let me go back here. So the delivery on the roof, there are developers now who are already starting to think about flying drones. That's a ways away, but people are already thinking about it. Just wanted to point that out. For apartment buildings and even office buildings, architects are starting to build in balconies for drone delivery with all of those package delivery. And the reason is you no longer have to have that gigantic package storage room and you cut out the middleman. The drone takes the package to the balcony of apartment 603. So just keep that in mind as well. Buildings of the future, the grocery store. Light bulbs went off when Amazon bought Whole Foods. It was a real estate play. And so now you've got, my Whole Foods has a bar and music nights. They're going to install electric vehicle charging. And again, micro warehousing. If you think about it, Amazon wants to get you your package no matter what you order within an hour. That means more warehouses. So in LA right now, the hottest real estate commodity, even though housing is horrible out there, is urban warehousing. And it's because Amazon wants all these different places. So if you are ordering varnish from Denmark, or your favorite hairbrush, or what else is bizarre that people order? That new night cream that only Amazon sells, they can get it to you within an hour. And that is going to require just a whole new land use category that's ubiquitous in micro warehousing. Now, of course, some of that could go into parking if parking actually demand goes down. But if you're a planner, this should be on your radar. If you're a developer, this needs to be on your radar. So for Chester County, how am I doing on time? I feel like I'm running over. So seamless connections. From Columbus, Ohio, this was their application that they won for a smart city competition, and they're looking at commuter rail and what it looks like with smart cities. And this ought to look very familiar. So you can start to build up your commuter lines in the beginning with all of these accommodations for all of these new modes that are still evolving and still growing. In the background, you've got a little bit of higher density housing. You may be able to actually build that on site next to your electric charging. You can still have cows in the background. That's okay. In fact, that's probably adds to the placemaking element of what it is. We also for Chester County, first last miles to transit. First last mile is just basically how do you get the population of people who have the easiest access to make it even easier. Like those electric bikes, imagine people 5 miles away may be able to actually ditch the car. And that's in fact what happened in Portland when Kaiser actually did an experiment by giving out 70 electric bikes to three different locations. And they found that those people did swap out their cars. All those dots are people who swapped out a car for an electric bike ride. So just wanted to plant that seed. Those of us who love electric bikes aren't crazy. For shared use, Marin County has an on-demand transit, so it's almost like Uber or Lyft to take people to the different train stations. Again, there's a lot of fear about autonomous cars actually depleting use of transit or replacing transit, making it sort of wither on the vine. A lot of what policymakers want to do is to actually turn that around so that all of our policies, all of our incentives, all of our pricing is built towards delivering people to transit and figuring out that transit balance. And then finally, I'm going to close it off with a planning story of how all of this unfolds. A lot of planners say, I know where I am today. I know this stuff is coming in 30 years. I have no clue what to wake up and start working on tomorrow. So a lot of what I try and do is figure out what to do the day after tomorrow. What do you do when you open up your computer? Looking at shuttles and how you can evolve. Right now, there's a lot of work on private on-demand microtransit like Marin County. That can be a first step towards autonomous, but again, it's trying to get more people on more shared use and use technology to make it seamless so that what may seem cumbersome with a van pool right now is the go-to way to get to work in a couple of months or years. Then what you can do is you can start to look at some of this autonomous shuttle technology, where it's working. It's in Las Vegas right now. It's on the University of Michigan campus. We can learn from them and figure out what routes in Chester County make sense. Those in the beginning will likely have an operator on board. They will likely be limited routes. They will be very conservative when it comes to delivering service. But we can learn and grow to the point where maybe some of that first last miles will be on-demand driverless shuttles, bringing people to the rail, to your autonomous bus rapid transit, and to TMACC's portfolio of different transit options. And then when you wake up tomorrow, so this was passed in June. Anyone who's a planner knows that the minute that you release a plan, you start working on the update. And so what do you have to start thinking of in Phoenixville for your multimodal transportation? What does that next update look like? So I'm just going to leave it right there. Thank you for tolerating such a fire hose of stuff. Again, you will get all of this, and I look forward to sitting in sessions today because as someone who helps with scenario planning, who's trying to build services that work for you, I need to hear what y'all need. So I look forward to that. I'm going to be asking lots of questions, so thank you.